Joining me now is White House correspondent at the Washington Examiner, Christian Datoc. Well, Christian, you just saw that story. It's a huge story in the United States. We've seen other stories very similar to it over the past few years.
That's right, Tim. And President Biden addressed this for the first time yesterday, putting out a statement, joining the Nichols family in urging people to protest, but to do it peacefully. This all feels quite similar to the George Floyd and Breanna Taylor protests that, of course, took place during coronavirus when widespread violence and destruction were hand in hand with a lot of these protests, pushing back on these police killings of Black Americans. In particular, it's sad we're still dealing with this, but it's an ugly side to American history that the country is grappling with at the current moment.
We will look at another ugly side, and that is gun violence very shortly. But let's have a look at the economy to start with and the increase in the debt ceiling.
This is a very particular issue that the president did not want to deal with. Of course, he was vice president back in 2011 when the country was on the precipice of a default. Now, the reason this is happening is because House Leader Kevin McCarthy, now the newly minted Speaker of the House, made a deal with some Republican lawmakers to hold the president's feet to the fire. U.S. debt, let's be clear, is out of control. There's been a lot of spending that's been put in place over the part of the last 3 years. Some of that has come off the books, but President Biden's massive programs dealing with infrastructure in families across the country has caused that debt to skyrise. Now, Republicans say they won't negotiate a debt limit increase without cutting long-term benefits programs like Social Security, like Medicare, and currently Washington is at a stalemate.
It's going to be at a stalemate on a number of occasions, isn't it, because of the state of the House after we saw the midterms. Obviously, it wasn't the midterms that the Republicans wanted, but even still, for the Democrats, it's very difficult in and around domestic policy.
It is, and this frequently happens when there is a shift in power in the White House. The midterm elections usually acts as a referendum on the party in power. That being said, being able to hold on to the Senate does give President Biden and Democrat leaders some hope that they can further their agenda, even if it isn't some of these large-scale economic packages. There is hope that there might be bipartisan accord on gun reform. Of course, you mentioned those shootings in California that took place just in recent days. There's been, I think, a stat that I saw earlier this week, as many mass shootings in the country as days in the year through late January. So this is a topic that some folks on the right are starting to make headway on. You have to look back at the gun package that President Biden ushered through just last year. It fell far short of a full assault weapons ban like the president wanted, but I do believe this was a step in the right direction.
A step in the right direction, but they're always tiny steps, aren't they, Christian? It's a tragic anomaly, really, that, you know, the US acts as a world police in so many environments, so many violent environments, but back home, the death toll is just extraordinary. I think I read something the other day where there's been more deaths by gunfire domestically in the US than wartime since, and including the Vietnam War.
The numbers are staggering, Tim. There's really no way to defend it. It is a uniquely American problem that we're dealing with right now. And unfortunately, neither side of the aisle, neither Republicans nor Democrats, seem to have all the answers. This is a topic that keeps boiling over when you compound it with things like police brutality, with domestic terrorism, the crime, just the availability to purchase firearms, whether legally or illegally, is probably the hottest topic in the country, the most hotly debated issue that we've seen in my lifetime.
What do you think will change things, if anything? Like, what is the water cooler discussion where you roll?
Well, in Washington, a lot of the blame is being put on Republicans. I do think there is a younger generation of Americans that are taking over leadership, both inside the government and outside. Maxwell Frost is a freshman congressman from Florida. He's the youngest member of the House ever elected, and he was a student at Marjorie Stoneman High School in Florida back in the Parkland mass shooting nearly 5 or 6 years ago. he is now a sitting member of government, and you can believe he is going to champion gun reform. I think it's going to take a new generation of leaders to pick up the torch, and unfortunately, a lot of lobbying from some of these activist groups. The NRA, of course, has been sort of the stonewall for Second Amendment proponents here in America over the last 30 to 40 years. That tide is shifting, just given how frequently these mass shootings are happening and how they're happening in every community across the country.